Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel, and today I'm here to share an exciting and a magical journey how a tiny pollen grain basically forms into the seed and the seed basically form into a brand new plant. So I hope today along with me you will be learning this journey, how does a pollen grain basically convert into a brand new plant. There are 4 steps of turning into a brand new plant. The first step is basically pollination. What does pollination means? Pollination means the transfer of pollen grain from the anther of a flower to the stigma of the flower. So that process is known as what? That process is known as pollination. Now, who will do the pollination? Pollination can be done by the abiotic agent also, like wind and water, and pollination can be done by the biotic agent also, like the birds, like the bees, and like insect. Pollination is generally of 2 types, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. If the plant is same और the flower is same, ठीक है, मतलब प्लांट अगर आपका एक है उसमें फ्लावर अलग अलग भी हो सकते हैं, उसमें फ्लावर सेम भी हो सकता है, बट द कंडीशन इज इफ द प्लांट इज सेम सो द पॉलिनेशन विल ऑलवेज बी सेल्फ पॉलिनेशन. But if the plant is different, the pollination will always be cross pollination. So there are 2 types of pollination, that is self pollination and cross pollination, and this can be done by again various methods. Now come to the next term, that is fertilization. Now what happened? We are basically taking the pollen grain and we are lending it on the stigma of the flower. Now after this the term comes the fertilization. What happened? The stigma and the pollen grain, they will have the chemical dialogue delivery between them, means they will chemically communicate with each other, and if they find that this pollen grain is basically compatible to me, so what will happen? Stigma will accept that pollen grain. But if the chemical dialogue delivery basically interpreted the stigma that this pollen grain is not compatible to me, so what will happen? The stigma will reject the pollen grain and again the process will not take place further. मतलब कि अगर स्टिग्मा ने उसको रिजेक्ट कर दिया तो आगे का प्रोसेस क्या होगा? वहीं पे स्टॉप हो जाएगा, और अगर स्टिग्मा ने उसे एक्सेप्ट कर लिया तो आगे का प्रोसेस क्या हो जाएगा? वो वहां पे स्टार्ट हो जाएगा. सो दिस मीन्स दैट द स्टिग्मा बेसिकली अलाउज द एंट्री एंड एग्जिट ऑफ द पॉलन ग्रेन. वो पॉलन ग्रेन की एंट्री और एग्जिट पे क्या रखेगा? चेक रखेगा. नाउ इफ द पॉलन ग्रेन इज ऑफ द सेम स्पीशीज, मान लो हमारे पास वी आर हैविंग द फ्लावर ऑफ चाइना रोज. If the pollen grain of the lily is falling on the China rose, so there will be no fertilization occurring. Why? Because the species will be different. But if the species is same, so the fertilization will occur. Now, how does the fertilization is occurring? I will basically explain you with a well-labeled diagram. So this is basically a diagram. What is happening in this diagram? This hole is basically the part of the female reproductive part. Okay, this is basically upper sticky part known as stigma. This is style, and what is this? This is ovary. Now what happened? What I told you that pollination is basically the transfer of pollen grain onto the stigma. Now what is happening when the stigma is accepting the pollen grain? Means when it is finding that the pollen grain is compatible to me, so what happened? A pollen tube will develop. What happened? A pollen tube will develop. And what is the function of pollen tube? The function of pollen tube is basically to carry the pollen grains that contain what? That will contain basically the male gamete. Okay, so pollen tube का function क्या है? It will basically carry the pollen grain that contain male gamete to the ovary, and in ovary what will happen? We have the ovules, and in ovules what will happen? We are having the female gamete. So what is happening in the ovules? The male gamete and the female gamete is combining, and this male gamete and female gamete fusion basically leads to the formation of zygote. मतलब ovules में क्या हो रहा है? That there is a fusion of the male gamete that the pollen grain is containing and the female gamete that is already present in the ovule. They will meet, and that process is known as fertilization, and it will result into the formation of one structure, and that structure is basically known as what? Zygote. Okay, so this is basically a diagrammatic view how does the fertilization is occurring, and the fertilization is basically leading to the formation of a structure that is called as zygote, and zygote is basically a one-celled structure, or you can say that it is basically a single-celled structure. So I hope that With this diagrammatic view, you got a clear idea how does fertilization occur and how does the formation of a single cell structure zygote occur. Now, what happens after fertilization? After fertilization, the ovary basically swells up and converted into the fruit, and the ovules basically convert into the seeds. Whereas the other structures of the plant, they basically dry and fall off. Now, there is another process that is known as dispersal. What happens in dispersion? We are having a parent plant and the parent plant contains multiple fruit. In multiple fruit, we might have the multiple seeds. So, the scattering of these seeds away from the parent plant is known as dispersal of seed. Can you tell me why dispersal of seed is necessary? Because if all the seeds will be falling at same place, so they might grow at the same place, and when they will be growing along with the parent plant on the same place, they will basically fight for energy, for their food, for the sunlight, for water and for minerals. And ultimately, all the plant will die because they will not get the appropriate amount of nutrition and appropriate amount of resources. That is why the dispersal of seed is basically necessary. Dispersion can be done by wind also, water also, insect also, and nature has given a phenomena of explosion. Matlab fruit will basically explode and the seeds will basically get dispersed. The next process is known as germination. What does germination means? When the seed is basically transferred from one place to another place, and when in that other place it is getting appropriate amount of heat, sunlight, water, minerals and various things that is required for its germination, for its growth. So what will happen? The seed will basically grow into a tiny new plant. Now, what are the processes in the germination of the seed? First, you will sow the seed in the soil and then you will water that seed. When the water is basically absorbed by the seed, the outer tougher seed coat basically gets split. मतलब वो क्या हो जाता है? वो burst out हो जाता है, वो split हो जाता है, and what happen? A tiny radicle. Radicle means the root will emerge, and then after the radicle, a tiny plumule. Plumule means the shoot or the stem will emerge. After this radicle and plumule emergence, you will find that the two tiny green leaves will emerge, and these two tiny green leaves now take the responsibility of the photosynthesis for that tiny plant. Now this tiny plant then again will grow into a bigger new green plant. Now there is one question in my mind that is arising that before this tiny green leaf, who is basically taking care of the nourishment of the plant? मतलब कि इस photosynthesis वाली जो छोटी छोटी दो green leaves हैं, उनसे पहले plant के nourishment की, nutrition की जो responsibility है वो कौन लेता है? So for this, you can answer this question in the comment box and I will basically look forward for your answers.